My name is Lydia, I'm 34 years old, and I never thought I'd find my elderly parents shivering in the bitter cold outside my own home, while my in-laws partied inside like they owned the place. The image of my father supporting my mother's trembling body as snowflakes collected on their grey hair haunts me to this day. What happened next changed everything forever. Before I tell you this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had to stand up to people who tried to take what was yours. Life was supposed to be perfect. I worked as a kindergarten teacher at Oakwood Elementary, coming home each day with finger paint stained clothes and stories about 5-year-olds that made my husband James laugh. At 35, James was successful as a structural engineer at a prestigious firm downtown. We met during college and married 2 years after graduation. Our wedding was small but beautiful, with both our families seemingly getting along well enough during the celebration. My parents Harold and Martha were first-generation immigrants who worked tirelessly their entire lives. Dad spent 40 years as a mechanic, his hands permanently stained with grease and calloused from hard work. Mum cleaned houses until arthritis made it impossible, then worked as a cashier at the local supermarket until retirement. They weren't wealthy by any means, but they saved every penny possible. Their dream was always to see me succeed where they couldn't. James's family was different. His father Richard owned a successful insurance company that James never wanted to join, preferring to make his own way. His mother Diane considered herself somewhat of a socialite, involved in various charity committees primarily for the networking opportunities. James' older sister Stephanie had followed in her father's footsteps, working as an executive in his company and inheriting all of his business sense and their mother's social climbing ambitions. When James and I decided to buy our first home 3 years ago, the housing market was brutal. We'd been saving, but prices kept climbing beyond our reach. That's when my parents surprised us. They came to dinner one evening and handed us an envelope containing a check for $90,000. Their life savings intended for retirement now offered to us as a down payment. "We've lived our lives," Dad said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Now we want to see you live yours while we're still around to enjoy it." I cried that night. James was stunned by their generosity. With their help, we secured a beautiful 3-bedroom craftsman-style home in a good neighborhood. The house needed some work, but it was ours. I insisted we put both our names on the deed, but made sure my parents' contribution was legally documented as a gift, specifically to me. Something about having that paperwork felt important, though. I couldn't have explained why at the time. The first cracks in our family dynamic appeared during the housewarming party. James's parents brought an expensive painting that clashed with everything in our living room. When I gently suggested we might find another place for it, Diane's smile tightened. "Oh, darling, this is where it belongs. Trust me, I have an eye for these things." She then proceeded to rearrange our furniture while Richard engaged James in conversation, effectively preventing him from seeing what was happening. By the end of the evening, our living room had been transformed according to Diane's vision. My parents brought a handmade quilt my grandmother had created along with a simple houseplant. Diane barely acknowledged these gifts, tucking the quilt into a closet when she thought no one was looking. "Your parents are sweet," she told me later. "But they don't quite understand quality, do they? I should have said something then. I should have established boundaries. But I wanted everyone to get along, and James kept insisting his mother was just being helpful." During this time, I discovered I was pregnant. The joy of expecting our first child temporarily overshadowed the growing tension. James and I converted the smallest bedroom into a nursery painting. The walls are soft yellow, since we decided to be surprised by the baby's gender. My mother knitted blankets and tiny hats, while my father built a beautiful wooden rocking chair by hand. Meanwhile, James's focus increasingly turned toward earning a promotion before the baby arrived. I understood his desire to provide, but his extended hours left me alone more often than I would have liked. At 7 months pregnant, I was starting to feel the strain both physically and emotionally. As my pregnancy progressed, so did my in-laws' presence in our lives. They began dropping by unannounced often when James was working late. Richard would inspect the house, commenting on repairs needed or improvements to be made. Diane would open my refrigerator and cabinets, making notes about my inadequate food supplies. "James needs proper nutrition, especially with the baby coming," she would say, despite the fact that I prepared healthy, balanced meals every day. Stephanie started using our house for what she called small gatherings with her friends from Richard's company. These were hardly small, with 10 or 12 people filling our living room, drinking wine and discussing business, while I awkwardly navigated my pregnant body through the crowd, feeling like an intruder in my own home. James saw nothing wrong with any of this. "They're just excited about the baby," he would say. "And my sister's apartment is too small for entertaining. We have the space, so why not share it?" But it wasn't sharing if I had no say in the matter. I felt increasingly invisible in my own home, a spectator to the gradual takeover of the life James and I had built. My parents noticed the change during their increasingly rare visits. They would call before coming over, unlike the Taylors, who simply appeared whenever they felt like it. Dad would bring tools, quietly fixing things around the house that Richard had merely pointed out as deficiencies. Mum would bring home-cooked meals that I could freeze for later, knowing I was often too tired to cook after teaching all day. But their visits grew less frequent after an uncomfortable Sunday dinner, where Diane spent the entire evening making pointed comments about my parents' accents and quaint mannerisms. James remained silent throughout, and when I confronted him later, he accused me of being overly sensitive because of pregnancy hormones. "My mother just has high standards," he said defensively. "She doesn't mean anything by it." But the hurt in my mother's eyes told a different story. They began declining invitations, and I couldn't blame them. Instead, I would visit them on weekends when James was golfing with his father, finding peace in my childhood home that was increasingly absent in my own. As my due date approached, the situation deteriorated further. I came home one afternoon to find Diane and Stephanie in the nursery, rearranging everything and replacing the handmade decorations my mother and I had created with expensive store-bought items. "We thought we'd surprise you," Stephanie said, not looking up from assembling an elaborate mobile that had replaced the simple wooden stars my father had carved. "The room was looking a bit homemade," Diane added, wrinkling her nose at the word as if it were dirty. I stood in the doorway, one hand on my swollen belly, feeling my child kick as if in protest. This should have been a joyful time preparing for my baby's arrival. Instead, I felt like I was losing control of everything. That evening, I confided in my colleague and friend Natalie during our weekly dinner. As I described the latest incident, she put down her fork and looked at me intently. "Lydia, this isn't normal. They're not just being helpful. They're taking over your life because you and James are letting them." Her words hit me hard. I knew she was right, but confronting the situation meant potentially creating a rift between James and his family, something he had always been desperate to avoid. "What if James doesn't back me up?" I asked, voicing my deepest fear. Natalie's expression softened. "Then you'll know where you stand. Better to find out now than after the baby arrives." I left our dinner with a knot in my stomach and a resolution in my heart. Things needed to change, and I would have to be the one to change them. The next morning, I walked into our kitchen to find Richard installing a new lock on our back door. He barely glanced up when I entered. "The old lock was a security risk," he explained, tightening a screw. "Anyone could have broken in." "We could have called a locksmith," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Or James could have done it this weekend." Richard chuckled condescendingly. "My son doesn't have my handyman skills. Besides, this is top of the line. You can't get this at your local hardware store." He finished the installation, then handed a key to Diane, who had appeared in the doorway. He pocketed another, then held out a third to me. "I've given Stephanie one as well," he said casually, "in case of emergencies." My throat tightened. "You gave my sister-in-law a key to our house without asking us." "James already approved it," Diane interjected. "And really, Lydia family shouldn't need to ask permission. We're only thinking of your safety." That evening, I confronted James about the locks. He looked uncomfortable but defended his parents. "Dad was just trying to help. The old lock was getting sticky anyway." "That's not the point, James. They're making decisions about our home without consulting us. They gave Stephanie a key without asking how I felt about it." James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I knew meant he was stressed. "Look, they can be overwhelming sometimes, I know, but they mean well, and with the baby coming, having more people with access to the house is probably a good thing." "What about my parents?" I asked. "Should they have a key too?" A flicker of something crossed James's face. Discomfort, dismissal. "That's different. Your parents live across town. Mine are only 15 minutes away. It makes more sense for them to have emergency access." I felt the baby kick as if urging me to stand my ground. "I want a key back from Stephanie, and I want us to make decisions about our home together, not have your parents dictate things to us." "You're overreacting," James said, his tone sharpening. "This pregnancy is making you paranoid. My family is just trying to help, and you're turning it into some kind of power struggle." I went to bed that night feeling alone despite sharing a bed with my husband. The distance between us seemed to grow with each passing day, widening into a chasm I wasn't sure how to bridge. The next week, my parents stopped by on Saturday morning. They'd called first, as always, bringing cinnamon rolls and coffee. We were enjoying breakfast together when Diane and Richard walked in without knocking. They stopped short at the sight of my parents at the kitchen table. "Oh," Diane said, her surprise quickly masked by a thin smile. "We didn't realize you had company." "We're just having breakfast with our daughter," my father said, his voice carefully neutral, but his posture stiffening. "We won't interrupt family time then," Richard said, emphasizing the word family in a way that clearly excluded my parents from that category. "We just stopped by to tell you we've invited some colleagues over for dinner tonight. Nothing formal, just 6 or 8 people." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Tonight here." "James didn't tell you?" Diane asked, though her tone suggested she knew very well he hadn't. "It's been planned for weeks. Richard's potential investors want to see a family setting. Your home is perfect." "Our home," I corrected, finding my voice. "And we have plans tonight." It was a lie, but I couldn't bear the thought of another evening playing hostess to Richard's business associates while Diane criticized my homemaking skills. "I'm sure whatever you've planned can be rescheduled," Richard said dismissively. "This dinner is important for James's future too, you know. Connections matter in his field." My father cleared his throat. "Perhaps you should respect Lydia and James's plans. Your dinner could be held at a restaurant or at your own home." Richard turned cold eyes on my father. "With all due respect, Harold, this is a family matter. James understands the importance of maintaining certain social connections. And I'm not family," my father asked quietly. The tension in the room was unbearable. My mother placed a hand on my father's arm, a gesture meant to calm him, but I could see the hurt in both their eyes. "Of course you are," I said firmly. "And Dad's right. We can't host tonight. I'm sorry you didn't check with us before making plans, but that's the reality." Diane's face flushed with anger. "I'll call James. He'll sort this out." They left without another word, the front door closing with unnecessary force behind them. As soon as they were gone, I burst into tears. My mother moved to sit beside me, her arm around my shoulders. "How long has this been going on, sweetie?" she asked gently. Between sobs, I told them everything. The constant intrusions, the rearranging of our home, the dismissal of my opinions, James's refusal to set boundaries. My parents exchanged worried glances but didn't interrupt. When I finished, my father took my hand. "Lydia, you need to stand up for yourself. This is your home, bought with your money too. Don't let anyone make you feel like a guest in it." "James won't support me," I whispered, giving voice to my deepest fear. "He always takes their side." "Then he needs to decide what's more important," my father said firmly. "His parents' approval or his wife's happiness." My phone buzzed with a text from James. Mum says you're being difficult about tonight." "What's going on?" I showed it to my parents, fresh tears threatening to fall. My mother's expression hardened unusual for her normally gentle demeanor. "You need to have a serious conversation with your husband," she said. "This isn't healthy for you or the baby." They left shortly after, both hugging me tighter than usual. I spent the rest of the morning cleaning the house, an activity that usually helped clear my mind. By the time James came home in the early afternoon, I had rehearsed what I wanted to say. But he spoke first, his expression frustrated. "Why did you tell my parents we couldn't host tonight? You know how important these connections are." "You never asked me, James. You never even mentioned this dinner." He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I thought I did, but it slipped my mind." "Still, it's not a big deal. Mum will handle everything." "That's exactly the problem," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Your mother handles everything in our home without asking. Your father changes our locks without permission. Your sister uses our house like it's her personal event space. And you let them." "They're family," James protested. "They're trying to help." "My parents are family too," I countered. "But they respect our boundaries. They call before visiting. They ask before changing things in our home." James sighed dramatically. "Your parents are different. They're simpler people." The condescension in his tone ignited something in me. "Simpler? You mean less entitled, less controlling? You're right, they are different. They respect us as adults with our own lives. They don't try to control everything we do." "You're exaggerating," James said dismissively. "Look, I've already told Dad we'll host tonight. The dinner is happening. Please don't make this difficult." I stared at my husband, truly seeing him for perhaps the first time. The man I loved, the father of my unborn child, was prioritizing his parents' wishes over my comfort in my own home. Again. "Fine," I said quietly. "The dinner will happen. But this conversation isn't over, James. Things need to change." He looked relieved, clearly thinking he'd won. "Great. Mum and Stephanie will be over at 5 to set up. As he headed upstairs to shower, I sat at the kitchen table, my hand on my belly, feeling utterly defeated. But beneath the defeat, a tiny spark of determination flickered to life. This couldn't continue. Something had to give. The dinner that evening was excruciating. Diane took over my kitchen, rearranging everything and making it clear my presence was unnecessary. Stephanie played hostess, introducing me to the guests as if I were an afterthought in my own home. Richard dominated the conversation, with James eagerly supporting every statement his father made. I retreated early, claiming pregnancy fatigue, and lay awake in our bedroom listening to the laughter downstairs. I felt like a stranger in my own life, invisible and irrelevant to the family narrative playing out below. The next day brought no improvement. James left early for a golf game with his father, while I tackled the aftermath of the dinner party. The kitchen was a disaster, with dishes piled everywhere, and leftover food spoiling on the counters. Apparently cleaning up hadn't been part of Diane's hosting duties. As I scrubbed dried wine from crystal glasses that had been wedding gifts, my phone rang. It was Natalie. "How are you holding up?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. I found myself telling her about the dinner, the ongoing situation with my in-laws, and James's refusal to acknowledge the problem. "I feel like I'm disappearing," I admitted. "Like this house and this marriage are becoming places where I don't belong." Natalie was silent for a moment. Lydia, my cousin, went through something similar with her husband's family. She ended up talking to a lawyer friend who helped her understand her rights. Would you consider doing the same? Just to know where you stand? The suggestion startled me. A lawyer seemed so drastic, so final. But then I thought about the nursery my in-laws had taken over the locks. They'd changed the dinners they'd imposed. "Do you know someone I could talk to?" I asked quietly. "Amy Winters. She specializes in family law. She's straightforward and discreet. Should I set up a meeting?" I agreed, feeling both terrified and relieved. Just talking to someone couldn't hurt, I reasoned. It didn't mean I was giving up on my marriage. The next week brought new tensions. Diane announced she would be staying with us for the first month after the baby was born. "You'll need help," she declared over Sunday brunch at their house. "First-time mothers always do, and James will need to focus on work." "My mother has already offered to help," I said, trying to keep my voice even. Diane waved a dismissive hand. "Martha is too old to be running after a newborn. Besides, I've raised 2 children. I know what I'm doing." I looked to James for support, but he was nodding in agreement with his mother. "It's a good idea," he said. "Mum has experience and you'll be recovering from childbirth." "I want my mother," I said firmly. "She's who I'll be comfortable with when I'm at my most vulnerable." Stephanie chimed in. Mum is right though. Your mother is getting on in years. And no offense, but does she really know about raising children in today's world? Things have changed since you were a baby. I felt cornered, outnumbered in this family discussion about my postpartum care. "We can talk about this later," I said finally, unwilling to continue the conversation in front of James' entire family. That evening, as James and I drove home, I tried again. "I don't want your mother staying with us after the baby is born," I said directly. "I want my mum's help. I'll be recovering from childbirth, and I need someone I'm completely comfortable with." James kept his eyes on the road. "My mother was only trying to help. She has experience with babies. So does mine. She raised me, remember, and she respects my boundaries. Diane doesn't." "You're being unfair," James said, his knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. "My mother has always been there for us." "Been there, James, she's been taking over. There's a difference." We rode the rest of the way in tense silence. When we arrived home, I noticed a strange car in our driveway. "Isn't that Stephanie's new BMW?" I asked. James looked uncomfortable. "Oh yeah, she mentioned she might stop by." Inside, we found Stephanie and 2 of her friends lounging in our living room, wine glasses in hand, music playing loudly from our stereo. "There you are. Qu'est-ce que t'as?" she called out, not bothering to get up. "We were just talking about the charity gala next month. You 2 are coming, right?" Before either of us could answer, one of her friends spoke up. "This house has such potential. You should really let Diane help you decorate properly. She has amazing taste." I felt something inside me snap. "Excuse me," I said coldly, "but we didn't invite anyone over tonight. I'm tired and would like to rest in my home, without uninvited guests." The room fell silent. Stephanie's friends exchanged uncomfortable glances. "We were just having a little get-together," Stephanie said, clearly offended. "No need to be dramatic. It's not your home to have get-togethers in," I replied, surprising myself with my firmness. "Please leave." James grabbed my arm. "Lydia, what's gotten into you? They're just visiting. I pulled away from him. No, James, they're trespassing. There's a difference. Stephanie and her friends gathered their things, making a show of how inconvenienced they were. As they left, Stephanie paused beside me. Pregnancy hormones making you crazy, huh? She whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. Don't worry, we'll sort everything out after the baby comes. Mom's really good at organizing household routines. After they left, James exploded. What the hell was that? You humiliated my sister in front of her friends. Your sister was using our home without permission again. Just like your mother rearranges our things without asking and your father changes our locks without consulting us. I'm done with it, James. Done. You're overreacting, he insisted. Family shouldn't need formal invitations. Your family seems to think they don't need permission for anything involving our lives, I shot back. And you enable them. The argument continued late into the night, resolving nothing. James eventually stormed out to sleep in the guest room, while I lay awake in our bed, the baby kicking restlessly as if sensing my distress. The following week, I met with Amy Winters during my lunch break. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who listened attentively as I described the situation. So the house was purchased with a significant contribution from your parents, specifically gifted to you, she clarified. I nodded. $90,000. We have documentation showing it was a gift to me, not to both of us. She made notes. And your in-laws have been systematically inserting themselves into your home life with your husband's permission, but against your wishes. Yes, it's like they're slowly taking over and James can't or won't see it. Amy set down her pen and looked at me directly. Lydia, you're in a difficult situation, but not an uncommon one. Based on what you've told me, you have strong legal standing regarding the house. Your parents' contribution, properly documented as a gift specifically to you, gives you significant equity. She continued outlining my options. I could insist on couples counseling with James. I could formally document the ongoing intrusions by my in-laws. In a worst-case scenario, I could consider separation with clear protection for my equity in the house and a solid custody arrangement for the baby. I'm not saying jump straight to separation, Amy cautioned, but knowledge is power. You deserve to know where you stand legally. I left her office feeling simultaneously lighter and heavier. I had options, but each one required confrontation I wasn't sure I was ready for. That evening, I discovered something that forced my hand. Looking for a missing prenatal vitamin prescription in James's office, I found bank statements showing he had withdrawn $20,000 from our joint savings account. The account that held the money we'd been saving for the baby's future. When confronted, James became defensive. Dad needed a short-term loan for a business opportunity. It was too good to pass up. The money will be back with interest in a few months. You took our baby's money without discussing it with me. I was incredulous. That account was for our child's future. It still will be, James insisted. The investment will pay off and we'll have even more set aside. Dad knows what he's doing. That wasn't your decision to make alone, I said, my voice shaking. We're supposed to be partners, James. Equal partners. He looked away. You wouldn't have understood the opportunity. Women don't generally get business investments. The casual sexism stung almost as much as the financial betrayal. I understand a lot more than you think, I said quietly, including the fact that my husband doesn't respect me enough to consult me about our child's future. The conversation ended in another stalemate. James refused to acknowledge he'd done anything wrong, and I was too angry and hurt to find middle ground. The weeks that followed were tense. I began documenting everything following Amy's advice. Each time my in-laws entered our home without permission, each time they made decisions that should have been ours to make, I noted it down with dates and details. James noticed my withdrawal but attributed it to pregnancy discomfort. In some ways, he wasn't wrong. At 8 months pregnant, I was physically uncomfortable, but the emotional discomfort far outweighed the physical. One evening, I overheard a phone conversation between James and his father that chilled me to the bone. The property values in your neighborhood are rising, Richard was saying, his voice audible through James's office door. If you sold now and invested with me, you could afford something much larger near us. Lydia's attached to this house, James replied. Her parents helped with the down payment. Richard's laugh was dismissive. So what? You're the primary breadwinner. The decision should be yours. Besides, once the baby comes, she'll see the sense in having a larger home closer to family. Her family lives across town anyway. They won't be much help day to day. I stepped away from the door, my heart pounding. They were discussing selling our home, the home my parents had helped us buy with their life savings, moving us closer to the Taylors and farther from my own parents. That night, I couldn't sleep. The baby was active, kicking and shifting as if sharing my anxiety. I slipped out of bed and went to sit in the nursery, now fully equipped with all the high-end items Diane had insisted upon my mother's handmade treasures hidden away in drawers. Looking around at this room that should have brought me joy, but instead filled me with dread, I made a decision. I would not bring my child into a home where their mother was powerless. Something had to change, and if James wouldn't help make that change, I would have to do it myself. December in Minnesota brings early darkness and bitter cold. By 5 o'clock on Christmas Eve, the temperature had plummeted to 15 degrees below zero, with wind chill making it feel even colder. Snow had been falling steadily all day, coating the world in white, that glowed faintly blue in the winter twilight. I had spent the morning at school helping prepare for the annual holiday performance, despite being on maternity leave. One of my former students, 6-year-old Noah, had been counting on me to hear him practice his solo, and I couldn't bear to disappoint him. The program had run longer than expected, with parents taking photos and children excited about the approaching holiday. As I was preparing to leave, the principal approached me with a worried expression. "Lydia, I just got a call. Noah was in a car accident with his mother on their way home. They're at a memorial hospital. He's asking for you." My heart dropped. Noah was a sweet child who had struggled with shyness all year until I'd discovered his beautiful singing voice. The thought of him hurt and frightened was unbearable. "I'll go right now," I said, gathering my things. Before leaving the school, I called James to let him know the change of plans. "My parents are coming over for Christmas Eve dinner," I reminded him. "They should arrive around 6. Can you make sure everything's ready? The ham just needs to be heated and all the side dishes are prepped in the refrigerator." "Don't worry," James assured me. "I'll take care of it. Go see your student. Drive safely in this snow." Relieved, I headed to the hospital. Noah had a broken arm and minor cuts, but was otherwise okay. His mother had fared worse with a concussion and several broken ribs. I stayed with Noah while doctors treated his mother, reading him stories and helping him calm down. His father was traveling for work and racing to get back, but flights were delayed due to the snowstorm. By the time Noah's aunt arrived to take over, it was nearly 7:30. The hospital's windows revealed a world transformed into a winter wonderland, beautiful but treacherous. The drive home took twice as long as usual, my car creeping along roads where plows fought a losing battle against the relentless snow. When I finally turned onto our street at 8:15, I was exhausted and looking forward to a warm house and Christmas Eve dinner with my family. As I approached our house, I noticed all the lights were on and several unfamiliar cars parked in our driveway and along the street. Confused, I parked at the curb, the nearest spot available. As I carefully made my way through the snow toward our front door, a movement near the side of the house caught my eye. Squinting through this falling snow, I made out 2 figures huddled together on our covered side porch, partially sheltered from the snow but still exposed to the freezing air. My breath caught in my throat as recognition dawned. It was my parents. I rushed toward them, slipping in the snow in my haste. My father was supporting my mother, whose lips had taken on a frightening bluish tinge. Both were shivering violently, their coats dusted with snow that suggested they'd been outside for some time. "Dad, Mom, what are you doing out here?" I cried, reaching them and immediately wrapping my arms around my mother. "We've been knocking," my father explained, his voice shaking from cold. "For over an hour. No one answered, though we can hear people inside. We tried calling, but no one picked up." I helped them toward the front door, fury building with each step. Through the frosted glass panels, I could see movement inside, heard music and laughter. Our doorbell had a distinctive chime that was impossible to miss, and my parents had clearly been calling my cell phone, which I'd left in the car during my hospital visit. I jabbed my key in the lock and threw open the door. Warm air rushed out along with the sound of Christmas music and animated conversation. What I saw inside froze me in place as effectively as the winter cold. Our living room had been transformed. The simple decorations my parents and I had put up were gone, replaced by elaborate arrangements of poinsettias, glittering ornaments, and expensive-looking garlands. A massive Christmas tree I'd never seen before dominated the corner where our modest tree had stood that morning, and the room was filled with people I barely recognized, dressed in holiday finery, drinks in hand. In the center of it all stood James, laughing with his parents and sister. He wore a new sweater I didn't recognize, looking completely at ease in this gathering that had materialized in our home without my knowledge. Richard was the first to notice me standing in the doorway, my parents behind me. His smile faltered slightly before he raised his voice over the music. "Ah, Lydia's back, and she's brought her parents after all." Heads turned in our direction. James broke away from his conversation, his expression shifting from surprise to discomfort, as he took in my snow-covered appearance and the sight of my shivering parents. "Lydia, you're late. We were worried." His tone suggested mild inconvenience rather than actual concern. "My parents have been outside for over an hour," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. In 15 below weather, while everyone inside was too busy partying to answer the door. An uncomfortable hush fell over the room. Diane stepped forward, her perfectly made-up face arranged in a mask of concern that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh dear, what a misunderstanding. We didn't realize they were coming tonight. With all the last-minute changes to the guest list for our Christmas gathering, they must have been overlooked." "Last-minute changes?" I repeated incredulously. This was supposed to be a quiet family dinner with my parents, not whatever this is. I gestured around the room full of strangers. "Well, when you called to say you'd be late, we thought it would be nice to invite a few friends," Richard explained smoothly. "Christmas Eve shouldn't be spent alone after all." James finally approached, seeming to register the seriousness of the situation. "Are your parents okay? They look frozen." "They're not okay," I snapped. "Mom has arthritis that worsens in cold weather. Dad had a respiratory infection last month. They've been standing in sub-zero temperatures for over an hour because no one would answer the door to the dinner they were invited to." "I heard the doorbell once," Stephanie chimed in from across the room. "But Dad said it was probably carolers and we were in the middle of toasting the holidays." The casual dismissal in her tone was the final straw. I turned to my husband, who at least had the decency to look ashamed. "James, my mother needs to get warm immediately. I'm taking them to the kitchen, away from all these people." The word people came out like a curse. "Then you and I are going to have a conversation." Without waiting for a response, I guided my parents through the crowd of onlookers, many of whom had the grace to appear embarrassed by the situation. In the kitchen, which had also been transformed with elaborate decorations and catering equipment I'd never seen before, I helped my parents remove their wet outer garments and sat them at the breakfast bar. I made hot tea with honey for both of them, wrapping my mother's arthritic hands around the warm mug. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, fighting back tears. I had no idea any of this was happening. My mother's hands were still trembling, but she managed a small smile. "Not your fault, sweetheart." My father looked less forgiving, his normally kind face set in hard lines as he watched James enter the kitchen. "Lydia, I can explain," James began, keeping his voice low. "Not now," I interrupted. "My mother needs to warm up properly. She might need to go to the hospital if her temperature doesn't normalize soon." As if on cue, my mother began coughing a deep, concerning sound that sent fear through me. My father's arm went around her immediately. "Martha," the worry in his voice was palpable. "Breathe slowly, honey." The coughing continued, and I saw my mother struggling to catch her breath between spasms. James stood uselessly in the doorway while I grabbed my phone to call for help. "No ambulance," my mother protested weakly when the coughing subsided. "Just need to warm up." Bang! But her face had taken on an alarming greyish tinge, and my father and I exchanged concerned glances over her head. "I'm taking you to the emergency room," I decided. "This isn't something we can handle at home." "I'll drive you," my father said immediately. "No, Dad, you're too cold yourself. I'll drive." James finally spoke up. "I can drive everyone." I turned to him with a coldness that had nothing to do with the winter weather. "You have guests to attend to. Your family's party seems to be in full swing." Without another word, I helped my mother to her feet and guided her back through the living room toward the door. The partygoers parted silently, conversations dying as we passed. Richard and Diane stood near the Christmas tree, their expressions a mixture of annoyance and forced concern. "Is everything all right?" Diane asked, her voice carrying across the quiet room. "No," I answered simply. "My mother needs medical attention after being locked out in the cold." "No one locked them out," Richard objected immediately. "That's a ridiculous accusation." My father, who had been silent until now, stopped and turned to face Richard. "We knocked and rang the bell for over an hour. You can't tell me no one heard us with all these people right inside." "Well, perhaps if you'd called ahead to confirm," Diane began. "They were invited," I cut in, "by me and supposedly by James, to a family dinner that apparently turned into whatever this is without anyone informing us." James appeared beside me, car keys in hand. "Let me drive you all to the hospital, please." After a moment's hesitation, I nodded. We didn't have time to argue, and my primary concern was getting my mother the care she needed. The drive to the emergency room was tense and silent, except for my mother's increasingly worrying cough. James kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror as I sat in the back with Mum, but I refused to meet his eyes. At the hospital, my mother was admitted immediately. The diagnosis came quickly. Exposure to extreme cold had exacerbated her underlying asthma and triggered pneumonia. She would need to stay overnight at minimum. As the doctors settled her into a hospital room, my father took me aside in the hallway. "This can't continue, Lydia," he said firmly. "What happened tonight was not just inconsiderate. It was dangerous." "I know," I whispered, tears finally breaking free. "I had no idea James would do something like this. I told him you were coming. He promised he'd take care of everything." My father's expression was grave. "I think it's time you told us exactly what's been happening in your home. All of it." So I did. Right there in the hospital hallway, I told my father everything. The gradual takeover by my in-laws, James's refusal to set boundaries, the financial decisions made without my input, the discussions about selling our home. When I finished, my father was silent for a long moment. Then he pulled me into a gentle hug, careful of my pregnant belly. "You're not going back there tonight," he said decisively. "Your mother will be here overnight and I'll stay with her. You need rest in a safe place where you're respected. We'll get a hotel room near the hospital for you." I started to object, then realized he was right. The thought of returning to that house filled with people who had so casually endangered my parents was unbearable. James, who had been filling out paperwork at the nurse's station, approached us tentatively. "How is she?" He asked, genuine concern in his voice for perhaps the first time that night. "She has pneumonia," I said flatly, "from standing in sub-zero temperatures for over an hour." James paled visibly. "Lydia, I'm so sorry. I had no idea they were outside for so long. When my parents suggested inviting a few friends over since you were delayed, I thought it would be nice. I figured your parents had decided not to come because of the snow. Did you even call them to check?" I demanded. "Did you think for 1 second about what might have happened to them?" His silence was answer enough. "I'm not coming home tonight," I informed him. "I'm getting a hotel room near the hospital." "You can't stay in a hotel on Christmas Eve," he protested. "Not in your condition. Come home with me. My parents and their friends will be gone soon." The fact that he still didn't fully grasp the magnitude of what had happened nearly broke me. "Your parents arranged a party in our home without permission, replaced our Christmas decorations, ignored my parents at the door, and caused my mother to develop pneumonia." I said, my voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "And you let them. You helped them. So no, I won't be coming home with you tonight, or possibly ever again." The colour drained from James's face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this marriage might be over if you can't see what your family has done, what you've allowed them to do." I turned away from him, then unable to bear the sight of his shocked expression. My father arranged for a hotel room where I spent a sleepless night, my baby kicking restlessly as if sensing my distress. The next morning, Christmas Day, found me back at the hospital. My mother's condition had stabilised, but the doctor confirmed she would need to stay for at least 3 more days. Pneumonia was serious at any age, but particularly concerning for someone in their late 60s. "You might have saved her life by bringing her in so quickly, the doctor told us. Another hour or 2 in that condition, and we could have been looking at a much worse situation." Those words echoed in my mind as I sat beside her bed watching her sleep fitfully. My father, who had refused to leave her side all night, looked exhausted but resolute. "What are you going to do now?" he asked quietly. I placed a hand on my swollen belly, feeling my child move beneath my palm. "I don't know yet, but I'm done being invisible in my own life." My phone had been buzzing periodically all morning with messages from James ranging from concerned to increasingly panicked as I continued to ignore them. Around noon, it rang with Natalie's number. "Merry Christmas," she said when I answered. "Though I'm guessing it's not very merry for you right now. How did you know?" "James called me looking for you. He sounds frantic. What happened?" I explained the events of the previous night, my voice breaking several times during the recounting. Natalie's response was immediate and firm. "You're staying with me when your mum is discharged. No arguments. I have a guest room ready and plenty of space for when the baby comes." "Natalie, I can't impose like that. It's not an imposition, it's what friends do." Her voice softened. "Lydia, what happened wasn't just inconsiderate. It was a statement about how James and his family view you and your parents. You need time and space to decide what to do next." She was right, I knew. Going back to that house to James and the shadow of his family's influence without resolving the fundamental issues would solve nothing. "Okay," I agreed finally, "but just until I figure things out." "Good. Now I think you should call Amy again. After what happened, you might need more than just advice." I promised to consider it, then ended the call as a nurse came in to check on my mother. The day passed slowly, with my father and I taking turns sitting with Mum while the other got coffee or stretched their legs in the hospital corridors. James appeared in the doorway around 3 o'clock, carrying an armful of flowers and wearing an expression of genuine remorse. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. "Please." "Tosim." I followed him to the visitors' lounge, which was mercifully empty on Christmas Day. "How's your mother, Gai?" he began. "Stable but sick. Pneumonia isn't a minor illness at her age." James looked down at the flowers in his hands. "I am so sorry, Lydia. I never meant for any of this to happen." "But it did happen," I said firmly, "and it's been happening for months in different ways. This was just the worst example yet." "I know." He set the flowers aside and reached for my hands. I let him take them, though I felt nothing but numbness at his touch. I've been blind to what my family was doing, to what I was letting them do to us. "Why?" I asked the question that had been burning inside me for months. "Why do you always choose them over me?" James was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on our joined hands. "I've spent my whole life trying to meet their expectations," he said finally. "Nothing was ever quite good enough. The right school, the right career, the right connections. When I didn't join Dad's business, it created a rift. I've been trying to make up for it ever since. By letting them control our lives, by putting their wishes above mine, above our child's." "I didn't see it that way," he admitted. "I just wanted everyone to get along. I wanted their approval. At my expense," I pointed out. "At my parents' expense." He flinched but didn't deny it. "I was wrong. What happened last night showed me how wrong I've been. Seeing your mother in that hospital bed because of something that happened in our home, something I could have prevented if I'd just stood up to my parents." He trailed off, swallowing hard. "Do you understand what needs to change?" I asked, "Yes," needing to hear him say it. "Everything," he said immediately. "My parents can't have keys to our house anymore. They can't rearrange our things or make decisions about our home. They can't just show up whenever they want. And they need to respect your parents, truly respect them, not just pretend to while looking down on them." It was everything I'd been asking for months, but coming now after such a serious incident, it felt too little too late. "I'm not coming home right now," I told him. "I'm staying with Natalie when Mom is discharged. I need time to think about whether this marriage can be saved." Hurt flashed across his face, but he nodded. "I understand. But Lydia, I want to fix this. I love you. I love our baby. Please give me a chance to make things right." "That's not just up to you," I replied. "Your family has been systematically taking over our lives. Do you really think they'll accept new boundaries now after all this time?" "They'll have to," he said with unexpected firmness, "because I'm not losing you over this." I wanted to believe him, but months of watching him choose his family's wishes over mine had eroded my trust. Words were easy, actions would be harder. "We'll see," was all I could offer him. "For now I need space, and I need to focus on my mother's recovery." He accepted this with a nod, though the pain in his eyes was evident. "I'll respect that, but I'm not giving up on us, Lydia." As he left, I wondered if there was still an us to save. The days following Christmas unfolded in a blur of hospital visits, tearful phone calls, and difficult decisions. My mother's condition improved slowly but steadily, and after 5 days she was discharged with strict instructions for rest and continued treatment. As planned, I moved temporarily into Natalie's guest room, while my parents returned to their home, with a visiting nurse checking in daily. James remained in our house, calling daily with updates and tentative questions about reconciliation. I kept our conversations brief and focused on practical matters, still too hurt and angry to consider returning home. During the separation, I maintained contact with Amy Winters, who advised me on my legal position and helped me develop a strategy for moving forward. By New Year's Day, I had made a decision. I texted James asking him to arrange a dinner at our house the following weekend with both our families present. He agreed immediately, clearly hopeful that this signaled my willingness to return home. In the days leading up to the dinner, I worked with Amy to gather documentation of everything that had occurred over the past months. Bank statements showing the money James had transferred without my consent, emails between James and his father discussing potential real estate moves without my knowledge, text messages from Stephanie about using our home for her gatherings. I even had security camera footage from a small camera Natalie had helped me install in the nursery after Diane's unauthorized redecorating, capturing subsequent visits by my in-laws when neither James nor I were home. The night of the dinner arrived cold but clear, the snow from Christmas having hardened into crusty drifts along the sidewalks. I arrived early, letting myself in with my key. The house felt simultaneously familiar and foreign, as if in just 2 weeks it had become someone else's space. James greeted me with cautious hope, having clearly made an effort with his appearance. The house was spotless, all traces of the Christmas party long gone, our original simpler decorations restored. "I put everything back the way you had it," he explained, following my gaze around the living room. "And I changed the locks. Only you and I have keys now." It was a start, I acknowledged silently, but far from sufficient to address the deeper issues at play. My parents arrived first, my mother moving slowly, but looking much improved. They embraced me warmly, then nodded coolly to James. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. The Taylors arrived 10 minutes later, sweeping in with their usual air of ownership. Diane carried an elaborate floral centerpiece that she immediately moved to place on the dining table. "Let me help with that," I said, intercepting her before she could rearrange anything else. "James and I have already set the table how we want it." Diane's smile tightened, but she relinquished the flowers with minimal resistance. Richard was already touring the living room, eyeing the decor with a critical gaze. "You put the original decorations back up," he commented to James. "Bit plain, don't you think?" Before James could respond, I spoke up. "We like them plain. This is our home and we prefer simplicity." Richard raised an eyebrow but said nothing further. Stephanie arrived last without the boyfriend she'd mentioned bringing, claiming he'd come down with a cold. "Convenient," Natalie murmured beside me. I had invited her as a moral support, something both James and his family had clearly found strange, but hadn't openly questioned. Dinner began as an awkward, stilted affair. Conversation remained superficial, with everyone clearly aware of the underlying tension. I had prepared a simple but elegant meal, proving to my in-laws that their constant criticism of my domestic abilities was unfounded. As the main course was cleared and before dessert was served, I decided it was time. I looked across the table at James, who gave me an encouraging nod, seemingly unaware of what I was about to do. "I've asked everyone here tonight for a reason," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. The events of Christmas Eve brought to a head something that has been happening for months. A systematic attempt by some people at this table to take control of my home, my marriage, and ultimately my life. Richard immediately bristled. "That's a serious accusation, Lydia." "It is," I agreed. "And I can back it up." I reached into a folder beside my chair and removed the first document, sliding it across the table. This is a bank statement showing $20,000 removed from the account James and I established for our baby's future. Money transferred without my knowledge or consent to Richard's business account. Diane gasped dramatically. "That was a business loan. A perfectly normal transaction between family members." "Without my knowledge," I repeated firmly, "from an account established specifically for our child." Before Richard could object further, I continued removing more documents from my folder. These are emails between James and Richard discussing selling our home and relocating closer to you again without consulting me. This house that my parents helped us buy with their life savings, gifted specifically to me. My mother reached across the table and took my father's hand as I spoke. The pride in their eyes gave me strength to continue. "I have text messages from Stephanie arranging gatherings at our home without permission. Security footage of Diane rearranging the nursery while neither James nor I were home. And finally, medical records showing the pneumonia my mother developed after being left in sub-zero temperatures on Christmas Eve, while all of you celebrated inside." The silence that followed was deafening. James looked stunned, clearly not having realized I had gathered such comprehensive evidence. Richard's face had turned an alarming shade of red, while Diane's had drained of all color. Stephanie stared at her plate, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "What exactly are you saying, Lydia?" Richard finally demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm saying this stops now. All of it. This is my home. Mine and James. Not yours. You do not make decisions about it. You do not rearrange it. You do not enter it without explicit invitation. You do not use it for your own purposes." I turned to James, who was watching me with an unreadable expression. And James needs to decide right now where his primary loyalty lies, with his wife and child or with his parents and their constant need for control. "This is ridiculous," Diane sputtered. "We've only ever tried to help, to guide you both in making proper decisions." "Help doesn't involve dismissing my opinions in my own home," I countered. "Help doesn't include rearranging my child's nursery without permission. Help certainly doesn't include leaving my elderly parents freezing on the doorstep while you throw a party you weren't authorized to host." "You're blowing everything out of proportion," Richard insisted, though, with less conviction than before. "James, tell her she's overreacting. all eyes turned to my husband. This was the moment of truth. Would he once again side with his parents, or would he finally stand with me? James was silent for a long moment, looking from his parents to me, then to my mother, who still showed the effects of her illness in her tired eyes and occasional cough. "She's not overreacting," he said finally. "Everything Lydia said is true. I allowed you to take over our lives because I was afraid of disappointing you. I put your wishes above my wife's needs. And on Christmas Eve, I let you endanger my in-laws' health because I was too cowardly to stand up to you." Richard's face darkened further. "Cowardly, after everything we've done for you, the connections I've provided, the opportunities I've created. At what cost?" James shot back, surprising me with his vehemence. "My independence, my marriage, my self-respect." "We are your parents," Diane interjected. "We have always wanted what's best for you." "What you think is best," James corrected. "But I'm an adult with my own family now. Lydia and our baby have to come first. They are my priority, not your approval." Stephanie, who had remained unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "You know they'll never change, James. They still treat me like I'm 16 and I work for Dad's company. They monitor my dating life, my apartment decor, even my vacation choices. Nothing is ever truly mine." The naked honesty in her voice seemed to stun everyone, especially her parents. Richard recovered first, his voice cold with anger. "If this is how you both feel, perhaps we should reconsider a number of arrangements. Your position in the company, Stephanie, the college fund for your child, James, the connections that have advanced your career." It was the worst possible response, confirming everything I had suspected about their conditional love and support. James didn't flinch. "If that's your choice, Dad, I can't stop you. But I won't sacrifice my marriage for your financial support." I felt a surge of pride and relief at his words, the first genuine emotion I'd felt toward James in weeks. He was finally standing his ground. "This is that woman's influence," Diane hissed, jabbing a finger in my direction. "She's turned you against us with her paranoid accusations." "No, Mom," James said quietly. "You did that yourselves, every time you dismissed Lydia's feelings. Every time you treated her parents with contempt. Every time you acted like our home was an extension of your own." My father, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke. "I think it's time for boundaries to be established. Clear, unambiguous boundaries about how you interact with my daughter and son-in-law's home and family." "We don't need you dictating terms to us," Richard snapped. "This is between us and our son." "No," I said firmly. "It's between all of us. Because we're all family, whether you like it or not. And in this family, everyone deserves respect, including my parents." Natalie, who had been quietly observing, chimed in with unexpected authority. "As an outside observer, I think what Lydia is asking for is extremely reasonable. Basic respect, privacy, and autonomy in her own home." Richard and Diane exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Something in their expressions shifted, as if they were finally beginning to realize the seriousness of the situation. "What exactly are you asking for?" Richard asked, after a moment, his tone marginally less hostile. "No keys to our home for anyone but James and me." I began counting off on my fingers. "No entering our home when we're not here. No rearranging our belongings or redecorating without express permission. No financial decisions made unilaterally. No undermining my parenting choices when the baby arrives. And most importantly, respect for my parents as equal grandparents to our child. And if we don't agree to these demands," Diane asked the word demands, dripping with disdain. James answered before I could. "Then you won't be welcome in our home or in our lives until you can respect these boundaries. I love you both, but I won't let you destroy my marriage." The ultimatum hung in the air like a physical presence. For perhaps the first time in their lives, Richard and Diane Taylor faced opposition they couldn't simply steamroll or dismiss. "You can't be serious," Diane said, though uncertainty had crept into her voice. "Completely serious," James confirmed. "The choice is yours. Respect our boundaries and be a positive presence in our lives, or continue as you have been and lose your relationship with us." Richard's jaw worked as he visibly struggled with this unprecedented challenge to his authority. Finally, he pushed back from the table. "I think we need time to consider this situation. Diane, Stephanie, we're leaving." As they gathered their things, I remained seated, my hand resting protectively over my belly. I had said what needed to be said, shown what needed to be shown. The next move was theirs. At the door, Richard paused and looked back at James. "Think carefully about what you're risking here, son. Family is forever." "Yes," James agreed, his arm now around my shoulders. Which is why I'm choosing to protect mine. After they left, a profound silence fell over the dining room. My parents exchanged glances, clearly processing everything they'd witnessed. "Well," my father said finally, "that was quite something." James turned to my parents, his expression contrite. "Mr. and Mrs. Parker, I owe you both the deepest apology for everything that's happened, especially Christmas Eve. There's no excuse for how you were treated." My mother, ever gracious, reached out and patted his hand. "People make mistakes, James. The important thing is learning from them." "I have," he assured her. "I've learned what truly matters." He turned to me, then his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and hope. "Lydia, will you come home? Can we try to rebuild what my weakness damaged?" I looked at him, this man I had loved enough to marry, to build a home with, to create a child with. He had failed me in many ways, but in this crucial moment, he had finally chosen correctly. "I'll come home," I said softly, "but we have work to do, trust to rebuild." "I know," he agreed immediately. "Whatever it takes. Therapy, new boundaries, anything." Natalie smiled approvingly. "I think that's my cue to leave. You two have a lot to talk about." She hugged me tightly, whispering, "Call me if you need anything," before saying her goodbyes to everyone else. My parents followed shortly after, my father helping my still recovering mother into her coat with tender care. Before leaving, my father took James aside for a brief, intense conversation that I couldn't hear. Whatever he said made James nod solemnly. Once everyone had gone, James and I sat together on the couch, not touching, but closer than we had been in weeks. "Do you think your parents will accept the new boundaries?" I asked. James sighed. "Eventually. They won't have a choice if they want to be part of our lives. It won't be easy, and they'll test the limits, but I won't let them cross those lines again." "And Stephanie?" A small smile crossed his face. "I think she might become our ally, actually. She's been under their thumb longer than anyone. What she said tonight about nothing ever being truly hers, I think she's ready for change too." We talked long into the night, outlining our path forward. James agreed to couples counselling and individual therapy to address the family dynamics that had led him to prioritise his parents' wishes over our marriage. We discussed practical steps to reinforce our new boundaries, from changing locks to establishing clear visit protocols. By the time we went to bed, exhausted but hopeful, I felt the first tentative renewal of trust between us. Not complete, not perfect, but possible. Repairable. 2 weeks later, Richard and Diane requested a meeting. They arrived at our home looking uncomfortable but determined. Richard had clearly prepared a speech which he delivered with the stiffness of someone unused to apologies. "We've considered your concerns," he began formally. "While we still believe our intentions were good, we can acknowledge that our methods were perhaps overzealous. If maintaining a relationship with you and our grandchild requires these new boundaries, we are prepared to respect them." It wasn't the heartfelt apology I might have hoped for, but from Richard Taylor it was significant concession. Diane added with visible effort, "I've also called your mother Lydia to apologise personally for Christmas Eve and to inquire about her health." This genuinely surprised me. "Thank you. That would have meant a lot to her. She invited us to tea next week," Diane continued, sounding bemused by this development. "To discuss grandparenting strategies," she said. The thought of my gentle, practical mother giving parenting advice to the formidable Diane Taylor brought a smile to my face. "You should go. You might learn something." Over the following months, change came gradually but steadily. James remained firm in enforcing our boundaries, surprising both his parents and me with his newfound resolve. Therapy helped him understand the patterns that had led to his people-pleasing behaviour with his family, and he worked diligently to establish healthier relationships with them. Richard and Diane struggled initially with their diminished influence, but adapted when they realised James was serious about his ultimatum. They began calling before visits, asking permission before offering suggestions, and making visible efforts to treat my parents with respect. It wasn't perfect, and there were occasional slips, but the improvement was undeniable. Stephanie, true to James's prediction, became an unexpected ally. Released from the pressure of presenting a united front with her parents, she revealed a warmer, more authentic personality. She apologised for her previous behaviour and made genuine efforts to develop a relationship with me based on mutual respect rather than competition. Our daughter Emma was born in February, a healthy, strong-willed baby who immediately wrapped both sets of grandparents around her tiny finger. Watching Richard Taylor tentatively hold his granddaughter while my father offered advice on the correct supporting position for her head was a sight I never thought I'd witness. The journey wasn't easy. Rebuilding trust takes time, and there were setbacks along the way. Moments when old patterns threatened to re-emerge, when boundaries needed to be restated and reinforced. But with each small victory, each instance of respect shown and autonomy honored, our family grew stronger. Today, as I watch my daughter playing in the backyard with both her grandmothers, I'm grateful for the crisis that forced us to confront the toxic patterns threatening our family. Finding my parents shivering in the cold that Christmas Eve was a turning point, painful but necessary. It took something that dramatic to show James what was truly at stake, and to give me the courage to demand the respect I deserved. In the years since then, I've learned that standing up for yourself doesn't mean losing family. Sometimes it's the only way to build a healthy one. James has become the partner I always believed he could be strong enough to love his parents, while maintaining the boundaries that protect our marriage. I've found my voice again, no longer the silent observer in my own life, but an active participant in creating the home and family I want. As for my in-laws, they're still learning. There are still moments of overstepping, still occasional attempts to exert control, but now there are consequences, and they've discovered that respecting our boundaries gives them greater access to the granddaughter they adore. My parents have blossomed in their grandparent role, their quiet strength and unconditional love, providing a beautiful counterbalance to the Taylors' more intense approach. Emma benefits from both learning different kinds of resilience from each set of grandparents. The most important lesson I've learned through all of this is that true family respects each other's autonomy. Love without respect isn't really love at all. It's ownership, and no one deserves to be owned. If you're struggling with boundaries in your own family, remember that you deserve respect in your relationships. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary for genuine connection. Have you ever had to establish firm boundaries with family members? Share your experience in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to hear more stories about finding strength in difficult situations. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the courage to protect what matters most in your own life.